Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Auckland Conversations here at the Viaducts Event Centre. I'm Tim Watts, I'm the City Centre Design and Delivery Manager with the Auckland Council, and I'm your MC for this evening. I think there's about 400 or so of us in the room, which is an amazing turnout, so thank you for coming this evening. As with all conversations, the running order is essentially 45 minutes of presentation, followed by, at about 6:30, some 20 minutes or so of question and answers. And we'll close this evening's events with a vote of thanks from Councillor Chris Darby. Before we go any further, I should, as is the custom, thank our sponsors of the conversation events, our partner sponsor, Razine and Jib, our programme supporters, Brookfield Lawyers, Boffa Miskell, ADNZ, MR Cagney, NZIA and NZPI. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Susan Quinn and team who organise all of these events and do an awesome job behind the scenes. So this evening promises to be an interesting foray into the world of tactical urbanism, a term that has recently taken hold in the lexicon of my team, certainly. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Mike tonight in terms of its practical application. It's an area of work which we're, as a council, really just starting to dip our toes in the water around. Just the other day I spent some 30 minutes or so in a disused underground toilet with a journalist. This isn't a confessional, this is, no, we were there to talk about heritage toilets, and you may have caught something on TV1 just yesterday. Auckland Council and the CCOs are currently looking at the opportunity of repurposing our heritage toilets, no longer usable as toilets, but offer opportunities for lots of different types of use. We as a team are also working with NZTA currently in terms of repurposing the Nelson Street off-ramp, the motorway off-ramp, as a cycleway footpath, which is really exciting. And earlier in the year, back in January, we managed to close the lower Queen Street space for the anniversary weekend. That afforded people the opportunity to enjoy a really important space in the city centre, but also provided an opportunity for people to really see what was possible out of that space. It's actually now informing the design as we move forward, so that space will become a civic space in time. So that's just a couple of examples, 3 examples of the work that we've been up to. Perhaps more excitingly in terms of the forward programme is the fact that just the other month we had City Centre targeted rate funding confirmed for a tactical urbanism programme. And now that's aimed at undertaking tactical improvements to the public realm within the city centre in an agile manner. We're hoping to cut through the red tape that we apply not only to ourselves but to the rest of Auckland to really deliver some quick outcomes that really start to change the city centre. And just tomorrow, in actual fact, we're going to the Auckland City Centre Advisory Board seeking targeted rate funding for an activation programme which will allow us to deliver a activation programme much like the one that we enjoy in the waterfront area that surrounds us, inviting people to enjoy the city centre in a whole new way. Mike has been advising the team over the last couple of days in terms about how we go around about this endeavour, and is with us for another couple of days, so really looking forward to engaging with him some more. So to Mike Lydon is an internationally recognised planner, writer and advocate of livable cities. He's the principal of the Streets Plans Collaborative, an urban planning design and research advocacy firm that strives to create high-quality public spaces. They believe that the key to reversing the harmful effects of suburban sprawl is to promote compact, walkable, mixed-use neighbourhoods. Mike and his business partner, Anthony Garcia, are co-authors of the recently published Tactical Urbanism, Short-Term Action for Long-Term Change. Now, to use Mike's definition, tactical urbanism is the use of short-term, low-cost and scalable projects intended to create long-term change. And at this point, I should really give Mike a plug for his book, which you'll see over there in the corner. Now, Mike will be around at the end of the session to sign books that they're available for purchase. So please take the time to go and have a chat with him and have a look at his book. I think that's it from me in terms of, by way of introduction. As I said, we'll break into questions in about 45 minutes' time. And just to mention that there are mics, roving mics going around, so when we get into the questions, please do, hold back on your question until you've got the mic in your hand. But without further ado, can I please introduce Mike Lydon?
I think my computer went to sleep, so give it a second, it'll come back up. How are you this evening? Doing well? All right. I'm excited to be here, guys. It's been a really busy couple days. Here we go. This is my first time in Auckland, and as my next slide will say, it's good to be here. I spent some time in Christchurch last October, and I was really struck by my time there, and so to come back to your country in such a short amount of time is great. And I want to thank everyone who's been involved with bringing me over here, and the last couple of days have been very fruitful and educational for me to see where your city is at and having discussions about where it might be going. Street Plans was already introduced, but I just want to underscore that while we do planning and design consulting projects around the US and North America, where this work comes from that I'm talking tonight is research and advocacy, which is a really important part of our work in terms of informing our consulting practice, but also trying to push our clients and push other advocates and communities forward to think about change in cities a little bit differently. So we produce a lot of these kinds of online, free, downloadable guides to disseminate information, as well as a few books. Tactical urbanism is one key part of our consulting practice. So we work a lot on street design, bike and pedestrian planning projects, urban design and land use efforts. But we found that the tactical urbanism approach has really helped us and helped our clients and cities, and particularly citizens, deliver change that's helpful for neighborhoods. We get asked to look at streets like this. This happens to be outside of suburban St. Louis. And you can see that the environment's not very conducive to biking or walking or public space, right? It's very auto-dominated. You can see the breakdown of space, 80-20, is not exactly equitable. So we create a vision, and we think about that would be really nice to build one day. But it's very difficult, right, to take a vision and a rendering and a drawing from the computer screen to reality. And that has been a really big part of our work, is thinking through methodologies on how we can do this, right? So how do we convince this guy that cycling is a good idea? How do we convince this guy that a 30-second delay from him getting to work is going to be better for everybody else who's not in the car? So it's really about a culture shift. And that's a really big piece of our work, is how do we think about change, yes, across the city and the city's culture, but also how do we think about change within the field and the practice of urban planning and design? How do we change that culture to try and be a little bit more nimble and responsive? So one example is open streets. And when I was living and working in Miami until about 2009, I was involved with a very large zoning project there. We were rezoning the entire city all at once. It was very politically complex. But I kept noticing that most people in the city didn't quite understand what a form-based code was, or didn't want to have discussions of density, surprise, surprise. And so it was through bike advocacy on the side of my day job that I got to experience open streets and helped organize this initiative to close down the main street in Miami for biking and for walking. And it was this huge aha moment that all of a sudden there were thousands of people enjoying a better environment to be in, and you could see the smiles on their faces. And I realized that this is a tool, this could be a key part of how we plan and design our cities. This is how we build a base of people who are excited about a future where they can bike and walk. And it was very, very impactful there. And we've gone on to really study and look at this movement and how it can be utilized in different cities. You can see the rapid growth of open streets across our country and into Canada has been really inspiring. So what's been really interesting, though, about these open streets is that communities are starting to use them as a platform for change. They're starting to look at how you can test and experiment with infrastructure while you have a captive audience, while you have thousands of people in your streets. And it gives them that experience, it gives them that awareness, gives them that exposure to new ideas in a safe space. And it can be really impactful for changing the culture of our streets on the very front end. But it's also, it's about a lot more than just cycling. I think a lot of you know that this can be an event that people come together in the community and get to see each other and their city in a new way. These projects, Open Streets, are in Los Angeles considered to be the first part of changing their culture on their streets, which, as some of you might know, is one of the most car-dominated cities in America. So they start with the open streets at the scale of the city, around 12 to 15 kilometer routes that moves around 4 or 5 times a year. There's pop-up events at the local neighborhood scale, trying things out. And then there's a program called People Street, which allows people in neighborhoods and business improvement groups to access pre-approved materials for different kinds of projects, like bike corrals and public plazas and parklets. And then all of those types of elements in that approach ends up informing the streetscape plan. So it's not that you go and you create the whole master plan all at once and say, okay, that's great, let's get the political will and the money and go build this thing. It's like, no, let's tinker, let's try, let's educate, let's encourage, and let's see what's working, what's not, and that helps us plan and design a more effective city. And so I've learned recently that you all have engaged in Open Streets here fairly recently, which I think is very exciting. I think it's a wonderful thing to think about how Open Streets can continue to evolve, become more regular, and like I said, become a platform for changing people's perceptions about what the city can be. Second inspiration is New York City's Pavement to Plazas program. And I know that Jeanette Siddiq-Khan was here fairly recently explaining what this is all about. But for me, looking from the outside in, it helped me rethink at the time that Open Streets was really starting to take off how we can plan physical infrastructure. And that street I just showed you is Broadway in the heart of the city. Doing some research, I learned that Broadway, you can see it here, that middle street, that green diagonal street there, there's a plan to make that a pedestrian park, essentially, in 1969. But like any big idea, big change that's proposed, it was very, very politically complex. So I think a lot of you might know who've visited New York that nothing really happened, until the lawn chairs were thrown out in the middle of Times Square for 3 days. And so this was all about testing this out. And as Jeanette often says, there was no Carmageddon. Life went on in Times Square. In fact, life got better for a lot of people. So they decided to make this project happen for the duration of the summer, and then they upgraded it to put paint on the ground, tables and chairs, etc. So it was not a step change of go to permanent infrastructure. It was now just a little bit of paint, and let's program this space and continue to test what's working and what's not. And so through that evaluation phase, they found there are a lot of positive results. I think one of the most important ones is there was a big decrease in injuries for all users of the street. So not just people biking or cycling, but also people driving as well. And so then they created the longer term vision. They created the hard infrastructure plan, with the renderings. Those came last, not first. And this is it under construction just last year. So 5 blocks of Times Square are now permanently closed to automobile traffic in a 5-year timeline. That's a really interesting, impactful way to think about delivering change in a typical capital budget kind of cycle. If they had proposed this all at once, I'm sure it never would have come to fruition. So it's that process that we learn from and have integrated into our practice is what we call build, measure, and learn. And it's an idea that we stole from a book called The Lean Startup. And it's, of course, cities and startups are a one-to-one comparison, right? But there's some methodologies that I think work really well. And not only that, I think there's also a cultural expectation amongst people, for better or for worse now, because of smartphones and apps and versions and all these things, that we get updates to things and things change and get better and improve on a fairly rapid cycle, kind of like a tactical urbanism project. So we see there's a lot of power in this iterative design. It allows people to experience something before all that investment is made. And if things don't go well, and sometimes they don't, then you can learn from those, feed it back into the process. You can remove things if it's not working, and then that can inform your longer term transformation. And so that same image there, here on the right there, temporary to permanent on the ground, it's experienced like this. So all of a sudden this gentleman here, feels comfortable cycling through the streets of Manhattan, a really effective project. And it can be used for footpath extensions on street corners, mid-block crossings. All of these temporary projects are being utilized as a way to deliver change. But what happens when your city is not New York, when your city is not taking the lead and looking for ways to make these changes happen? And I think that's a lot of cities, that's most cities. Well, citizens have a really powerful role to play in change delivery. This is a project called Build a Better Block that happened in Dallas, Texas in 2010. And what makes this tactical is that the neighborhood residents went out and they got a block party permit to legally shut off the street. But instead of closing it to automobiles, they decided to leave it open to cars and just change the public realm. And they added their own bike lane, for example. They brought in businesses to vacant storefronts, and they transformed the environment for all of 2 days. And what they did, though, was they actually circled every single law and ordinance that they were violating in developing this project. And so that when the city councilor from the district came and saw this and said, this is fantastic, look at all these people, there's these shops that are open, there's people biking and walking, this is a wonderful environment, they could say illegal, 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 and illegal. Can't do it, can't do it, can't do it, or it's very difficult. Right? Why do we have ordinances that are charging us $1,000, charging businesses $1,000 to put flowers on the street? Shouldn't that be something that we're encouraging? So anyways, it had this big transformative effect on the mindset in Dallas. And in fact, they went on to change some of their zoning code regulations to allow for more of these changes to happen. And not only that, but they actually welcomed the leaders of this project to come down and reactivate their City Hall Plaza, which was a very dead space. And so every month, they're doing the Living Plaza project, which brings in musicians and entrepreneurs to sell things or test out their business idea, food and events and activities. And it's a really wonderful way to actually bring life and character to a place that previously didn't have much of it. And so we see this rubbing, right, this friction all over where we work, that there's this challenge between the cities that we want as people and the cities that we're getting through the regulatory environment. And so a lot of this work comes out of this activism trying to advocate for more livable places. And here's a project where a person went out into the middle of the night in New Haven, Connecticut, and painted his own crosswalk. He was fed up with requesting this change that never came. He was fed up with the unsafe intersections, seeing people get injured, seeing speeding cars going through, not being aware of people. And so he took it on himself. So at this point, the city has two choices. You can crack down on that behavior and say, that's illegal and we can't allow this, it's unsanctioned, how could you even think of doing such a thing? That's vandalism. Or the city can say, wow, we really understand that you feel strongly about this, we understand the need, how can we be responsive and work with you in your neighborhood to bring these kinds of changes in a proactive way? And that's exactly what New Haven did. So on the bottom there of this article, you see the plan to upgrade that intersection to make it much safer. But not only that, the guerrilla urbanist Doug Hosliding got actually elected to be city alderman. And from there, he got asked to be, after proving competent, he got asked to be chief of transportation for the city of New Haven, right? And so I like to say that, if you're out there fighting the man, you have to be really careful because you just might become him by way of your leadership. And so these kinds of projects happen, right, fairly consistently. This is a group, they call themselves the Reasonably Polite Seattleites. And they went out and installed their own guerrilla bike lane in the middle of the night. And of course, that's technically illegal. And they wrote this note to the city and said, on and on and on, we're sorry that we have to do it this way. We've requested this, we're asking for safer streets, and we just want to show you that it's possible. And so the city actually responded in a very positive way and said, all right, what can we do to make this happen? They wrote a letter back to these Reasonably Polite Seattleites, which is a real kick, you should look it up online, and started moving some pieces and parts of their bike plan forward. So these projects are tactical. The whole point is that they're small in scale, they're quick, they're inexpensive, and they can lead to long-term change. In fact, that's the whole point. And we look at these projects in our research and how we apply these tools and techniques on the spectrum of unsanctioned to sanctioned. And what's been so fascinating is to see how so quickly and powerfully a lot of these projects move from one side to the other. Once a need is actually proven to be there, and the response becomes very clear. So we've written about this for the last 4 or 5 years. We did an online guide, 25 pages, very short, with case studies that we released in 2011. I left the work and came on vacation to go to Australia and Thailand for 3 weeks. And I came back, and I thought maybe 20 of my friends and colleagues would read this little document we threw up online, and thousands of people had already downloaded it. And so we realized we kind of hit a nerve with this approach.